All right, next video, executive branch and bureaucracies. So Article 2 of the Constitution is going to establish the executive branch and determine a few things such as the 4-year term. There were not initially term limits. Instead, we see 22nd Amendment 2-year term limit or a 10-year max. So therefore, if you are vice president and you take over the presidency due to let's say a death, and the president who has died was 3 years into a term, you could actually run for re-election twice. So you could serve up to possibly 10 years as president. So formal qualifications, you must be 35 years old, natural born citizen, resident of the United States, 14 years prior to the election. Some of the informal ideas that we have is the concept that basically political or military experience tends to be a consistency, politically acceptable. So you're not faring too far to the right, too far to the left. Tend to be married, white male, Protestant, Northern European ancestry. That is the normal characteristics. Now, obviously, we have seen a shift in some of those characteristics in our last two presidents, whether it was experience or background or ethnicity, but nonetheless, that's kind of the current state we are as far as the idea of characteristics of the presidency. So succession, 25th Amendment kind of changed succession and added to it. The Constitution basically provides that if the president can no longer be in service, then the vice president will carry out the power and duties of the office. But then reality kind of sets in after the death of FDR, and we see a vice president coming in. Was there really a plan of action beyond that? And so there really wasn't. And so the 25th Amendment establishes the process of succession, the line of succession, through not only if the president has died, but also if the president is incapacitated, who steps into office and how that takes place. So the impeachment process, the Constitution gives the House of Representatives the ability to start the trial process to bring charges, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanor. Once that occurs, then the Senate will hold the trial. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides over the trial if it's the president or vice president. If not, it is the vice president who presides over the trial of impeachment, because other people can be impeached who are elected officials or even appointed officials within the executive branch or within the government itself can be impeached. You got to have a 2/3 vote to be guilty and convicted. The Electoral College system. So the 12th Amendment changes the Electoral College system to where we see a ticket-based campaign. So the Electoral College will vote on president, vice president. Prior to that, it was based on the idea of first place, second place, but now that has changed. So they're both on the same ticket, which really has shifted responsibility in the electorate and the Electoral College to parties. In order to win the Electoral College, you need 270 votes. There are 538 electoral votes out there. It is a winner-take-all system, except for in 2 states. Nebraska and Maine have what is known as a district method. If a majority of electoral votes is not reached, then you will have to see the House of Representatives vote for president. And then the Senate votes on the top 2 candidates for vice president. Vice presidency really has limited constitutional authority. Vice president is the president of the Senate and also is second in line if the president is incapacitated at some point in time. Qualifications must be the same for the vice president as with the president. Vice president cannot be from the same state as the president. So presidential powers that are executive powers that are enumerated or are delegated are enforced laws, treaties, and court decisions, issues executive orders to carry out policies, appoints officials, removes officials, assumes emergency powers, presides over the cabinet executive branch. Military powers, commander-in-chief of the military has the ability to deploy troops. That is limited with the War Powers Act of 1973. Legislative powers involve the ability to set the agenda through the State of the Union. plays a large role in the budget process, can sign or veto a bill. As far as signing and vetoing a bill, we'll talk more about that. Proposes and influences legislation, calls for special sessions of Congress. So the president has those abilities as far as legislative. Diplomatically, appointing and receiving ambassadors, establishing a meeting with foreign leaders to perhaps develop treaties or executive agreements. Judicial powers, we have the president has the appointment power as far as appointing federal judges and Supreme Court justices. Also, the ability to grant reprieves, pardons, or amnesty. Party powers, the president is the leader of the party to a certain extent. The figurehead of the party can choose a vice presidential nominee, strengthens the party by looking to go out and influence elections for those that are seeking re-election. If the president is doing well, you're going to see a large number of people jump on the coattails of the president. If the president is not doing well with the polls, then you'll see people distance themselves. Appoints party members to government positions as patronage. You saw that you've seen that many times as far as White House staff, especially. A lot of those White House staff members served somewhere in the party and now have stepped into the White House and influencing really with the party platform. So limitations, Congress can override presidential vetoes with 2/3 votes. Congress controls the purse. Congress can impeach the president. Congress can not approve appointees. And legislation can be created to limit the president's powers. Judicial review is there for executive orders or executive action. As far as political checks, public opinion, the media, popularity, those things drive a lot of presidential decisions. So within the executive branch, you have the bureaucracy. And with the bureaucracy, it's the organization that allows for the executive branch to enforce legislation. They tend to have a hierarchy as far as authority. They have specialization. They're very task-oriented. They focus on certain subjects within the executive branch. The bureaucracy coincides or replicates the president's cabinet, and they're the ones who really are the ones who create the rules and regulations as it pertains to their agency and what they're going to go in and try and tackle as far as a topic or an issue. So a couple things that stick out on here that we need to talk about is this. Early on, the bureaucratic agencies became a hotbed for doing favors and letting people who were friends into positions of power and with the spoil system. So through the 1800s and early 1900s, we saw a number of presidencies that really were bogged down with a lot of corruption as a result of the spoil system. So the reform movement took place, and the first attempt at reform was actually in the late 1800s, during the beginnings of the Progressive Era, which you saw with the Civil Service Act, and that tried to eliminate the spoil system and replace it with a merit system, and it did so for the most part. You had more qualified people put into position of power and influence within the executive branch. They had to go through a qualification process. It wasn't just going through the process of appointing people to help out friends. Another reform that took place after the 20s and 30s is the Hatch Act, and this prohibits bureaucratic agents or people who are in charge of bureaucracies from really getting fully involved in political activities while on duty. Now, there have been some changes to that with the Civil Service Reform Act. They allowed for the ability to get involved in politics, but it has to be away from your job. You can't use your position to influence decisions as far as elections and things of that sort. And the Civil Service Reform Act also talked about establishing a process of recruiting and training and trying to make sure that we have new, fresh faces in our bureaucratic agencies to kind of help with changing over the time. As far as organization, you have your cabinet departments and you have your independent executive departments, you have your independent regulatory agencies, you have your government corporations. The type that they are, the cabinet are your close advisors who are going to work closely with the president. Again, they're not the first advisors, but still nonetheless they are appointed by the president. They run the executive departments that make up the bulk of the executive branch. Then you have your independent executive departments or agencies. They've been created by Congress to handle certain aspects. They are created because of the fact that they're necessary, they're too expensive, or they're too important. So agencies such as NASA are created as independent executive agencies. Then you have your independent regulatory agencies. And they're also created by legislative process through Congress. But they're there to go in and protect consumers, whether it's protecting consumers from the stock market or from media and things of that sort. And then you have your government corporations, and these are business entities that are run by the government. And that's your power companies such as Tennessee Valley Authority, and then your U.S. Postal Service. So the executive influence on bureaucracy really boils down to the appointment process and being able to have an impact on budgets. Congress also influences because they confirm appointments, but they can also impeach heads of bureaucratic agencies. And they are the ones who create legislation that drives really the mission of that bureaucratic agency. Be familiar with the iron triangles. Make sure we understand the relationship between bureaucratic agencies, interest groups, and congressional committees. The Executive Office of the President, this is dealing with the organizations that make up the inner workings of the White House, staff, National Security Council. All these things are part of the White House administration that it's married to the idea of working with the cabinet, but they also have a little bit different as far as their motivation, their loyalties to the president. Remember, White House staff members do not have to be confirmed by the Senate or the House. So your executive departments, make yourself familiar with these. Understand that the head of each one is known as the secretary, except for the attorney general, who's the head of the Department of Justice. Okay, we'll do judicial branch in the next video.